My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 32 years old and I'm from Austin, Texas. One evening, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, slid an envelope across the polished mahogany table. The wood gleamed under the soft glow of the dining room chandelier, a stark contrast to the cold knot forming in my stomach. Inside the envelope, I could feel the crisp edge of paper. A check. A large one. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand, adorned with a diamond ring that probably cost more than my car, gestured for me to open it. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? I did. My eyes scanned the numbers. It was a sum that could change a person's life. A number so significant it felt insulting. A bribe too grand to ignore, yet too demeaning to accept without a fight. Eleanor leaned in, her perfume, something expensive and heavy, filling the space between us. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, dropped to a low, cold whisper. "Walk away from my son, Mark. He deserves someone better, someone more suitable. Consider this compensation." The words hung in the air, heavy and blunt. She didn't mince them. She never did. For years, I had been the convenient target of her thinly veiled disdain, her passive-aggressive remarks about my background, my family, my inability to fit into their perfect world. But this was a new low. This was a direct assault, a transaction. My marriage, my life with Mark, reduced to a price tag. I didn't argue. What was there to say? Every argument I had ever tried to make with Eleanor had been met with a dismissive wave of her hand, a patronizing smile, or a cutting remark that left me feeling smaller, weaker. My past attempts to defend myself, to explain my love for Mark, to prove my worth, had always backfired, making me seem desperate, ungrateful. So this time, I just did what I knew she least expected. I smiled. A slow, quiet smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. It was a private smile, one meant only for me, because I knew something she didn't. Something that was about to unravel her perfectly constructed world in a way she could never imagine. The truth was, Eleanor's offer, while sickening, was also timely. My marriage to Mark, which she so casually sought to dissolve with a check, had been a hollow shell for months, maybe even years. We had met in college, two young, optimistic souls from different worlds. I was a scholarship kid, working 2 jobs to keep my head above water. He was the golden boy, charming, intelligent, heir to his family's successful real estate empire. Opposites attract, they said. For a while, it felt true. Our love was fierce, passionate, an escape from my own humble beginnings and a challenge to his privileged existence. But the real world, especially the world of the Mitchell family, had a way of grinding idealism into dust. Eleanor was the first and most persistent obstacle. From the moment I introduced him, I was under scrutiny. My clothes weren't quite right, my table manners were lacking, my opinions were unsophisticated. She never said these things directly, not in front of Mark at least. But her glances, her sighs, the way she'd bring up old family money or generations of breeding in my presence spoke volumes. Mark, bless his heart, tried to shield me at first. He'd defend me gently or sometimes not so gently. But over time, the constant pressure wore him down. He started to make excuses for his mother. "That's just how she is, Sarah. She means well." Or, "You know, she loves me. She just wants the best." Eventually, his defenses for me became less frequent, replaced by a weary silence, a subtle withdrawal. Our home, which I had tried so hard to make our own, started to feel like a temporary residence. Every piece of furniture, every decorative choice felt judged, sometimes openly, by Eleanor. She would visit unannounced, rearrange my cushions, criticize my cooking, and suggest new things for our house, always hinting that my taste wasn't quite up to their standard. Mark would stand by, offering weak smiles, occasionally interjecting with a half-hearted, "Mom, it's fine." But it wasn't enough. I needed him to be my partner, my rock, not just a bystander in my own home. The emotional neglect from Mark had become a slow, creeping poison. He was physically present, but emotionally absent. Our conversations were superficial. Our intimacy had dwindled to polite gestures. He was always busy with work, with family obligations, with anything that kept him from truly engaging with me. I felt like a ghost in our shared life, unseen, unheard. Just last week, it hit me hard during his father's birthday dinner. The whole family was there. Laughter, clinking glasses, the usual Mitchell family bravado. I tried to share an anecdote about something funny that happened at my job, a small victory I was proud of. Eleanor immediately cut me off, turning to Mark and asking loudly, "Mark, darling, did you remember to call the caterers for the charity gala? You know how particular Mrs. Henderson is." Mark, without even a glance in my direction, launched into a detailed explanation. The entire table, including my husband, pretended I hadn't spoken at all. It was a familiar pattern. My voice, my experiences, my feelings. They were always secondary, easily dismissed, irrelevant. I felt the familiar sting in my eyes, but I swallowed it down. Crying in front of them would only confirm their unspoken belief that I was too emotional, too weak. That night, lying in bed next to Mark, the gap between us felt wider than the Grand Canyon. I wanted to reach out, to shake him, to beg him to see me, to fight for me. But what was the point? He was already gone, lost somewhere in his mother's expectations and his own comfortable apathy. So, when Eleanor presented her cruel offer, it wasn't a shock. It was an affirmation, an official stamp on what I already knew. I was not wanted here, not truly. And Mark, by his inaction, by his silence, had already made his choice. The check was a final, undeniable proof that I was an outsider, a problem to be bought off. But it was also, perversely, a key to unlock the cage I'd been living in. Eleanor wanted me to walk away. She thought she was hurting me, stripping me of my dignity. But she was actually giving me the exact thing I had slowly, painfully come to realize I needed. An exit. And a clean one at that. I looked at her, meeting her cold, calculating gaze with my own. My smile widened just a fraction. This was not the end she envisioned. This was a new beginning for me. And the best part? She had no idea how much she was helping me. I folded the check and slipped it into my purse. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, my voice calm, steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "I appreciate your generosity." Her eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of confusion flickering in their depths. She probably expected tears, an argument, a desperate plea for her son's love. But she got none of that. She got a woman who had already died 1,000 emotional deaths in that family, and was now, finally, ready to be reborn. The real twist, the secret I held, wasn't just about my readiness to leave. It was about why I was ready and what I had already set in motion. Eleanor thought she was orchestrating my downfall. In reality, she was simply funding my escape. I still had a few pieces to move into place, a few conversations to have, a few final goodbyes. But the path was clear now, the path out. And it was all thanks to Eleanor's misguided attempt to control my life. The irony was almost sweet. Let me take you back to the beginning. It feels like a lifetime ago now. I met Ethan Mitchell during my senior year at the University of Texas. It was one of those cliche movie moments. I was buried in a stack of textbooks in the library, stressed and surviving on cheap coffee, when he sat down at my table. He had this easy smile that could disarm anyone, and an air of confidence that I found both intimidating and incredibly attractive. He told me I looked like I needed a break, and for some reason, I listened. Our backgrounds couldn't have been more different. I was there on a full academic scholarship, working as a waitress on weekends to cover my rent and expenses. My parents were good, hardworking people from a small town who had sacrificed everything to give me a shot at a better life. The Mitchells, on the other hand, were practically Austin royalty. Their name was on buildings, charity plaques, and in the society pages at the local paper. They were a dynasty built on real estate, oil, and generations of influence. Ethan was their eldest son, the heir apparent, groomed from birth to take over the family empire. In those early days, our differences were part of the magic. He was fascinated by my independence, by the fact that I had built my own life from scratch. He said he admired my drive. I, in turn, was drawn to his kindness, his warmth, and the way he seemed completely unburdened by the immense wealth he was born into. With me, he wasn't Ethan Mitchell, the heir. He was just Ethan. And I wasn't just a scholarship kid trying to make ends meet. I was just Sarah. Our love felt like a secret world we had built just for the two of us, a place where family names and bank accounts didn't matter. I was so naive. I thought that love would be enough. The first time I met his mother, Margaret, was the first crack in our perfect world. Ethan had arranged a dinner at his parents' sprawling estate. The house was more like a museum, with high ceilings, art-covered walls, and an unnerving, formal silence. From the moment I shook her hand, I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Margaret was a tall, elegant woman with perfectly coiffed hair and eyes that assessed everything with a cool, detached judgment. She smiled, but it was a tight, practiced gesture that didn't reach her eyes. "So, you're Sarah," she said, her voice smooth as silk, but laced with something sharp. Throughout the dinner, she peppered me with questions that felt more like an interrogation. Where did you grow up? What do your parents do? What are your plans after graduation? When I told her I was studying to be a teacher, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "A teacher," she repeated, drawing the word out as if tasting something unpleasant. "How noble! It must be so rewarding to work with children." The unspoken words hung in the air. How ordinary, how small. Ethan, to his credit, squeezed my hand under the table. "Mom, Sarah is going to be an amazing teacher. She's brilliant." Margaret just gave a little hum of acknowledgement and changed the subject, turning her full attention to Ethan to discuss a business deal, effectively dismissing me from the conversation. That night set the tone for our entire relationship. To Margaret, I was, and would always be, ordinary, an unfortunate phase her son was going through. It wasn't just her. Ethan's siblings quickly fell in line. His younger sister, Caroline, was overtly hostile. She'd make backhanded compliments about my clothes. "Oh, that dress is so cute. I think I saw something similar at the outlet mall last year." Or forget to include me in conversations, turning her back to me at family gatherings to talk to someone else. His younger brother, Daniel, was worse in a way. He was politely indifferent, treating me with a distant courtesy that made it clear I was a temporary fixture, not worth the effort of getting to know me. I tried so hard to fit in. I really did. I read the business journals so I could understand their dinner conversations. I memorized the names of their friends, their favorite vacation spots, their preferred brands of wine. I spent weeks planning thoughtful, personal Christmas gifts, only to receive generic, expensive presents in return. Like a designer handbag that wasn't my style at all, a clear signal that they hadn't bothered to learn a single thing about me. My loyalty was mistaken for weakness. My efforts were seen as desperate attempts to climb a social ladder I had no interest in. I wasn't after their money or their name. I was in love with their son. But they could never see that. They couldn't comprehend a motive that wasn't transactional. The cruelest part was hearing Margaret's words repeated back to me indirectly. One night, after a particularly tense family dinner, Ethan and I got into an argument. I was hurt by a comment Caroline had made, and Ethan, as usual, was telling me to let it go. In a moment of frustration, he let something slip. My mother just thinks... She thinks I could have done better, okay? She doesn't understand us. Done better? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What does that even mean? He wouldn't look at me. He just ran his hand through his hair and sighed. Someone from our world, Sarah. Someone who gets it. It's not about you. It's just how she is. But it was about me. It was a direct judgment on my worth. Margaret didn't just disapprove of me, she actively despised me. She saw me as a stain on their family's perfect legacy, and she never missed an opportunity to remind Ethan, and by extension, me, of that fact. Despite all of this, I stayed. I married Ethan, believing our love could withstand the constant pressure. I worked hard to be a good wife, to support him, to build a life with him. But you can't build a house on a crumbling foundation. The constant belittling from his family and Ethan's growing refusal to stand up to them eroded us from the inside out. He chose peace with them over partnership with me, time and time again, until I felt more like a guest in his life than his wife. The unwanted wife, an ordinary woman who had dared to marry their golden boy, and for that would never be forgiven. The first year of our marriage was a blur of trying. The next few years were a slow, painful education in failing. The pressure from Ethan's family didn't lessen over time. It intensified, becoming a finely tuned instrument of psychological warfare, with the family dinner table as its primary battlefield. These dinners, held every Sunday at the Mitchell estate, were a mandatory ritual. For me, they were a weekly reminder of my outsider status. I would sit at the long, polished table, surrounded by the murmur of conversations that flowed around me as if I were a rock in a stream. They talked about polo matches I'd never attended, ski trips to Aspen I wasn't invited on, and business associates I'd never met. When I tried to contribute, my comments would be met with a brief, polite smile before the conversation seamlessly moved on, leaving me behind. I became an expert in the art of sitting silently, a ghost at the feast, pushing food around my plate while my own husband laughed and engaged with the very people who were making me invisible. Ethan's sister, Caroline, grew bolder with her insults, disguising them as jokes. She had a special talent for making me the punchline without ever seeming overtly cruel to the undiscerning eye. I remember one evening the family was discussing the upcoming wedding of a distant cousin. Margaret was critiquing the bride's choice of venue, when Caroline, swirling the wine in her glass, looked at me with a sly, knowing smirk. "Well, at least this marriage will last," she said, directing her comment to the table at large, but her eyes were locked on me. "The groom is marrying someone from a real family, not just a temporary placeholder." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "No offense, Sarah. We all know you're just here until Ethan finds someone real." A wave of hot shame washed over me. I could feel the blood rush to my cheeks. The air crackled with a sudden awkward tension. Ethan's father cleared his throat and took a long sip of water. Daniel, his brother, studied his steak with intense focus, but no one said a word in my defense. Not a single person. I looked at Ethan, my heart pleading with him. "Say something, please. Defend me. Defend us." He just shifted uncomfortably in his chair and picked up his fork, refusing to meet my gaze. His silence was a roar. It was a confirmation of Caroline's words. In that moment, he wasn't my husband. He was one of them. He was a Mitchell, and I was the outsider he had failed to protect. The sting of that moment was so sharp, so visceral. It took my breath away. I wanted to stand up, throw my napkin down, and walk out, but I was frozen by a mix of shock and humiliation. So I did what I always did. I endured it quietly. I took a small, shaky sip of water and pretended I hadn't heard. Margaret's tactics were more insidious. She never resorted to Caroline's brand of open mockery. Instead, she mastered the art of the comparison. She had a better match in mind for Ethan, and she made sure I knew it. Her name was Isabel Davenport, the daughter of one of his father's oldest business partners. Isabel was everything I wasn't. Blonde, impossibly thin, and born into the same world of effortless privilege as the Mitchells. Margaret would drop her name into conversations with casual precision. "Oh, Ethan, I ran into Isabel at the club today. She's just done wonders with the Children's Hospital fundraiser. She has such a knack for leadership. A woman like that would be a true asset to a man in your position." Every word was a carefully aimed dart. An asset. I was a teacher. In their eyes, I was a liability, a weight holding their son back from his true potential. She would bring out old photos of Ethan and Isabel at debutante balls, talking fondly about how they were the golden couple and how everyone always assumed they would end up together. She did this all in front of me, with a serene smile on her face as if she were merely reminiscing, but we both knew what she was doing. She was showing me the life Ethan should have had, the wife he should have chosen. The drive home after these dinners was always suffocatingly quiet. I would sit in the passenger seat, staring out at the blurred city lights, the words of his family echoing in my head. Placeholder, ordinary, not an asset. "Why don't you ever say anything?" I asked him once, my voice tight with unshed tears. "Say what, Sarah? It's just Caroline being Caroline. You can't take her seriously." "And your mother talking about Isabel again? Does that not bother you, Ethan?" "She's my mother. She's just protective. She doesn't mean any harm. You're being too sensitive." Too sensitive. The classic defense of someone unwilling to confront the person causing the pain. He wasn't just dismissing my feelings, he was invalidating them. He was telling me that my hurt was my own fault, a product of my own flawed perception. Each time this happened, a little piece of my love for him chipped away. The man I had married, the one who had admired my strength and independence, was gone. In his place was a man who prioritized his family's comfort over his wife's dignity. The humiliation I endured at their hands was painful, but the sting of his betrayal was what truly broke me. It was a slow, creeping poison that hollowed out our marriage until there was nothing left but silence and a vast, empty space between us. I continued to show up, to play the part of the dutiful wife, but inside, I was quietly, irrevocably letting go. The call came on a Tuesday evening. It was Margaret. Her voice on the phone was unnervingly pleasant, a tone she rarely used with me. "Sarah, dear," she began, the word dear sounding foreign and sharp on her tongue. "I was hoping you could stop by the house tomorrow evening. Just the two of us. There are a few things I think we should talk through." A cold sense of dread washed over me. A private meeting with Margaret was unprecedented. In all the years I'd been with Ethan, she had never once sought me out for a one-on-one conversation. Her disapproval was a public performance, meant for the family audience. This felt different. This felt like an ambush. A part of me wanted to say no, to make an excuse, but another, more foolish part felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe, after all these years, she was finally ready to extend an olive branch to try and understand. Maybe she wanted to talk about Ethan, about how distant he'd become, and find a way to fix things. So I agreed. "Of course, Margaret. I'll be there around 7. The next evening, as I drove through the wrought iron gates of the Mitchell estate, my hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. The house loomed at the end of the long driveway, its windows lit up like watchful eyes. It had never felt like a home, and tonight it felt like a courthouse where my sentence was about to be read. Margaret greeted me at the door herself, another strange departure from the norm. She led me not to the warm, familiar living room, but to her husband's formal study, a room of dark wood, leather-bound books, and a heavy, suffocating silence. It was a place for business, for transactions, not for family. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to a stiff leather armchair opposite the large mahogany desk. She remained standing, a deliberate power move that immediately put me on the defensive. She didn't offer me a drink. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. The cordial tone from the phone call was gone, replaced by a cool, clinical efficiency. She walked behind the desk and retrieved a simple white envelope. My heart began to pound in my chest, a frantic, trapped bird. She placed the envelope on the desk and, with 2 perfectly manicured fingers, pushed it across the gleaming surface until it stopped just in front of me. I stared at it, confused. "What's this?" "It's a solution," Margaret said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "For everyone." My hands trembled as I reached for it. The paper felt cold, formal. I opened the unsealed flap and pulled out the contents. It was a cashier's check. My eyes scanned the numbers and the breath caught in my throat. $25,000. I looked up at her, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of it. Was this a gift? An investment in a business idea from my school? Nothing made sense. Margaret's expression was unreadable, her face a mask of detached composure. She leaned forward slightly, placing her hands on the desk. "You should walk away now," she said, her voice low and steady. "Leave Ethan. It's for the best. He has a legacy to uphold, a certain path to follow. You were a youthful indiscretion, Sarah, but the time for games is over." The words hit me like physical blows. Youthful indiscretion. All the years of my life, my love, my loyalty reduced to a mistake. "We'll make sure you're comfortable," she continued, gesturing toward the check as if it were a simple severance package. "This should be more than enough for you to start over, somewhere else. But you need to understand, our family legacy doesn't include you." There it was, the truth, stripped of all pretense and polite fiction. I wasn't family. I was a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied up and discarded. The room was silent except for the frantic pounding in my ears. I felt a surge of white-hot anger, a desire to scream, to throw the check back in her face, and to tell her exactly what I thought of her and her precious legacy. But then something else washed over me. A strange, hollow calm. All the pain, all the years of quiet humiliation, all the lonely nights and silent car rides home, it all coalesced into this one crystal-clear moment. This wasn't a tragedy. This was an ending that had been written years ago. Margaret was just finally handing me the script. My hands were still trembling, a physical betrayal of the stillness I felt inside. I carefully folded the check and slid it back into the envelope. Then I looked directly into her cold, expectant eyes. She was waiting for the breakdown, for the tears, for the pleading. She wanted to see me broken. I would not give her the satisfaction. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I picked up the envelope, the tangible proof of my worthlessness to them, and clutched it in my hand. "Thank you," I said. The words were quiet, but they landed in the silent room with the force of a gunshot. A flicker of confusion crossed Margaret's face. This was not the reaction she had anticipated. This was not in her script. I didn't offer any other explanation. I didn't need to. I turned, and with my head held high, I walked out of the study. I walked down the long marbled hallway, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. I didn't look back. I walked out the front door into the cool night air and didn't stop until I was safely in my car. Only then, alone in the darkness, did I let out the breath I had been holding. I looked at the white envelope sitting on the passenger seat. It was supposed to be the price of my dignity. Instead, it was the key to my freedom. And I had just walked out with it in my hand. Driving away from the Mitchell estate, the envelope felt like a lead weight on the passenger seat. Margaret's words echoed in my head. Our family legacy doesn't include you. She thought she was delivering a final, crushing blow. She thought she had won, that she had cleanly and efficiently excised me from their lives with a check. What Margaret didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had stopped trying to be a part of their legacy months ago. Instead, I had become the silent, unwilling custodian of its darkest secret. It started innocently enough. About 6 months earlier, Ethan had been preparing for a major quarterly presentation. He was stressed, working late, and one night he asked for my help. It was a simple task, really. He needed me to cross-reference a series of spreadsheets detailing project expenditures against a list of approved vendors. My eyes are blurring, Sar, he'd said, rubbing his temples. You've always had a sharp eye for detail. Could you just give this a once-over? It was a rare moment of professional inclusion. For a few hours, I felt like a partner. As a teacher, my life revolved around details. Lesson plans, grading, catching the small mistakes in a student's work. I was meticulous by nature, so I dove in. Organizing the data, checking the figures. Ethan was right. My eye for detail was sharp, and it didn't take long for it to catch on to something that felt wrong. There was a vendor I didn't recognize, Apex Logistical Solutions. The payments to this company were substantial and regular, yet their name wasn't on the master list of approved partners Ethan had given me. The invoices were vague, citing consulting fees and on-site logistical management for projects that, as far as I knew, didn't require that level of outside consultation. It was a small thread, but it was snagged on something. My first instinct was to tell Ethan. I thought I had found a mistake, or maybe an instance of external fraud. I imagined us working together to protect his family's company. But then I hesitated. I remembered all the times I had been dismissed, my opinions ignored. I decided to look a little deeper on my own first, to make sure I had my facts straight before I brought it to him. Late at night, after Ethan was asleep, I started digging. Using his company login, which he had carelessly left saved on our home computer, I searched for more information on Apex. The company was a ghost. It had a P.O. box address and a generic website with no employee names or specific services listed. The date of the company's incorporation was just over a year ago. The real shock came when I looked up the corporate registration documents online. The listed agent, the name on the official paperwork, was a man I'd never heard of. But the address listed for him was a condominium complex I recognized. It was the same one where Daniel, Ethan's younger brother, owned a unit he supposedly rented out. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. Daniel was the family's charming, irresponsible screw-up, always in need of a bailout, but considered harmless. But the connection was too specific to be a coincidence. This was the moment everything shifted. I knew with absolute certainty that if I took this to Ethan or to anyone in the Mitchell family, they would close ranks. They would protect their own. Daniel was blood. I was not. They would find a way to explain it away, to bury it, and most likely to blame me for snooping, for stirring up trouble, for being malicious. The truth wouldn't set me free. It would get me crucified. I was completely and utterly alone in this. So, I started my own quiet investigation. It became my secret project, a silent act of self-preservation. My life with the Mitchells had taught me that I had no power, no voice. But information was power. Whenever I had a plausible reason to visit the Mitchell Cower downtown, dropping off lunch for Ethan, picking him up for a dinner, I made quiet detours. I learned the layout of the accounting department. I made friends with a junior secretary who complained about how disorganized Daniel's expense reports always were. Little by little, I gathered the pieces. Using a small scanning app on my phone, I captured copies of invoices from Apex. I photographed shipping manifests for materials that never were delivered. The real treasure trove was the email server. Daniel was arrogant and sloppy. He thought no one was watching. I found emails where he approved payments to his own shell company. Back and forth exchanges with a personal email address I traced back to the man listed on the corporate filings, a college friend of his. It was all there, a clear, damning trail of embezzlement that amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned directly from the family business. I saved everything to a secure, encrypted cloud drive, a digital fortress no one knew existed. Every document, every email, every record was a brick in the wall I was building around myself. This evidence was my insurance policy. It was the only thing I had that they couldn't dismiss or ignore. For all the years they called me ordinary, for all the times they treated me as simple-minded, I was the only one who saw the truth. So as I sat in my car, staring at the envelope from Margaret, I didn't just see $25,000. I saw a pathetic, ironic joke. She was trying to buy me off with pocket change while her own son was robbing the family blind. Her grand strategic move to protect her legacy was a pathetic miscalculation. She was focused on the wrong threat. She had no idea that the real danger wasn't the unwanted wife she was trying to discard, but the beloved son she had coddled and protected his entire life. The check wasn't an insult anymore. It was confirmation. It was the final push I needed. My silent plan had never been about revenge. It was about survival. But now, holding their bribe in my hand, I realized it could be about something more. It could be about justice. The days following my meeting with Margaret were strangely calm. I went to work. I came home. I existed in the quiet space of our house, a ghost floating through rooms that no longer felt like mine. Ethan sensed a shift in me, but he mistook my quiet resolve for sadness. He was more attentive than he had been in months, a classic case of too little, too late. When the invitation came for the Sunday dinner, I accepted without protest. Ethan was relieved. He thought it was a sign that I was willing to keep trying. He had no idea I was going for a completely different reason. I was going to say goodbye. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, elegant black dress. I wore my hair pulled back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of control. As I walked into the Mitchells' dining room, I wasn't the timid, insecure woman they were used to. The years of anxiety I'd always felt in this house were gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. The dinner started as it always did. Meaningless chatter, polite inquiries about business, Caroline making a thinly veiled jab about the public school system where I worked. I let it all wash over me. I was an observer now, not a participant. I watched them all. Margaret, presiding over the table like a queen on her throne. Caroline, sharp and smug. Daniel, nervously charming and just a little too loud. And Ethan, my husband, sitting beside me, completely oblivious to the fact that our life together was about to end. Margaret waited until dessert was served. She tapped her glass with a spoon, a theatrical gesture to command attention. A pleased, self-satisfied smile played on her lips. "I have some wonderful news," she announced, her eyes sweeping over the table before landing on me with a look of patronizing benevolence. Sarah and I had a very productive chat the other day. She's made the brave decision to pursue some new opportunities, and we, as a family, will be giving her our full support in this new chapter. She's finally seen reason about what's best for everyone. The implication was clear. I was leaving. The problem was being solved. Caroline's face lit up with a triumphant smirk. Daniel offered me a weak, relieved smile. Ethan's head snapped towards me, his face a mask of utter confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low. He looked from me to his mother and back again. "What chat? What new opportunities?" "Now, Ethan, we can discuss the details later," Margaret said dismissively, waving her hand. "The important thing is that Sarah is doing the right thing." "The right thing?" Ethan's voice grew louder, the confusion hardening into fury. He finally understood. He was being managed by his mother, and he thought I was her willing accomplice. "You went behind my back, both of you?" he directed at me, his eyes flashing with a sense of betrayal I found almost laughable. The argument he was about to have with his mother was the one I had begged him to have for years. But it was too late. While Margaret tried to calm him down, I knew my moment had arrived. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for the purse seeming on my lap. The click of the magnetic clasp was unnervingly loud in the sudden silence that fell, as all eyes turned to me. I reached inside and pulled out the white envelope. I placed it on the table between my dessert plate and wine glass with a soft, definitive thud. The room froze. Ethan stopped talking. Margaret's serene composure finally cracked, her smile tightening at the edges. They all stared at the plain, white envelope as if it were a bomb. I let the silence stretch, savoring the shift in power. Then I met Margaret's gaze. "Funny thing about bribes," I said, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly even. I picked up my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, my hand as steady as a rock. I set the glass down gently. "Funny thing about bribes. They don't work well when the person you're trying to buy already knows your secrets." The final word, secrets, landed in the center of the table and detonated. The air turned thick with unspoken questions. I saw a flash of genuine fear in Margaret's eyes. Caroline's smirk vanished, replaced by a confused frown. But the most telling reaction came from Daniel. He flinched, a barely perceptible jerk, and his gaze darted wildly from me to his mother, his face suddenly pale. He looked like a cornered animal. Ethan stared at me, his anger forgotten, replaced by a dawning, horrified realization. He knew, in that instant, that this was about something far bigger than his mother's meddling. He was a spectator in his own life, and he had no idea what game was being played. For the first time in that house, I had all the control, and the silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. My single word, secrets, had sucked all the air out. Margaret's face, which moments before had been a mask of smug triumph, was now ashen. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, the color draining from her cheeks. Daniel looked like he was about to be physically ill. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I kept my tone calm and factual, as if I were a teacher presenting a lesson plan. "I'm not talking about family gossip, Margaret," I said, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces at the table. "I'm talking about business, the family business, the legacy you're so desperate to protect." I turned my attention to Daniel. He visibly flinched when my eyes met his. "For instance, I'm talking about a company called Apex Logistical Solutions. Does that name ring a bell, Daniel?" He shook his head, stammering, I don't know what you're talking about. This is insane. She's just a bitter, scorned woman making things up." "Am I?" I asked, raising a single eyebrow. I reached into my purse again and pulled out my phone, placing it on the table next to the envelope. I had prepared a simple, easy-to-read file. Apex Logistical Solutions was incorporated 18 months ago. It has no office, no employees, and no purpose other than to receive monthly six-figure payments from Mitchell Development for consulting fees. It's a shell company, Daniel, and it's registered to a P.O. box with your old college roommate, Kevin Peterson, listed as the agent. Ethan's father, Robert, who had been silent until now, straightened in his chair. His face, usually impassive, was now a thundercloud of cold fury. He looked at his youngest son with a terrifying intensity. I wasn't finished. And then there are the falsified expense reports for the downtown renovation project, the ones you personally signed off on, Daniel, billing for thousands of dollars in high-grade materials that were never delivered to the site. I have the invoices, and I have the emails where you authorized the payments. That's when the chaos erupted. It wasn't Ethan or his father who broke the silence. It was Caroline. She shot up from her chair, her face contorted with a rage so pure it was startling. She screamed at you, idiot! You stupid, greedy little idiot! Do you have any idea what you've done? You risked everything. For what? A new car? Another vacation? You've ruined us. It's not true, Daniel yelled back, his voice cracking with panic. He scrambled for a defense, anything to deflect the blame. She's the one you should be worried about, the lying, manipulative outsider who has been plotting against us from the beginning. The family turned on itself with a speed and viciousness that was breathtaking to behold. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect, powerful Mitchells didn't just crack, it exploded. Caroline was screaming at Daniel, calling him a disgrace. Daniel was yelling back, his denials growing more frantic and less believable by the second. Through it all, Margaret sat frozen, her face a pale, horrified mask. This was her worst nightmare. Her perfect family, her perfect legacy was imploding at her own dinner table. And the catalyst wasn't some external corporate raider or a rival family. It was her own son's greed and the quiet, ordinary woman she had tried so desperately to discard. Her perfect plan to protect their image by paying me to disappear was the very thing that had brought their real shame into the light. The irony was devastating. I watched the spectacle unfold, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. This wasn't my family. This wasn't my fight. For years, I had craved their acceptance, wanting nothing more than to be a part of their world. Now, watching them tear each other apart, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I had finally, truly, been set free. The family's perfect plan was never about protecting their image. It was about maintaining control. And in one quiet moment, with one simple word, I had taken all of that control away from them. They were exposed not just as snobs or bullies, but as corrupt, fractured, and deeply dysfunctional. And they had no one to blame but themselves. The dining room had descended into utter chaos. Caroline's shrieks echoed off the high ceilings as she hurled insults at Daniel, who was desperately trying to defend himself, his lies becoming more tangled and pathetic with each sentence. My father-in-law, Robert, stood stiffly, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury, looking at his youngest son as if he were a complete stranger. Through it all, Margaret remained a silent, ashen statue of disbelief. I expected Ethan to do what he always did, try to be the peacemaker. I braced myself for him to step in, to say something like, "Let's all just calm down and talk about this rationally." But that's not what happened. Instead, a new voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. "Enough!" Everyone froze. The yelling stopped instantly. It was Ethan. He hadn't shouted, but his voice carried a weight of authority I had never heard from him before. He wasn't looking at his squabbling siblings. His eyes were fixed on his mother, and his expression was one of cold, profound disappointment. He walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of her. The rest of the family seemed to fade into the background. In that moment, the entire room was about the two of them. "You did this," he said, his voice low and shaking with a controlled rage. He gestured toward Daniel, then back to the envelope on the table. "You were so obsessed with the imaginary threat you thought Sarah was that you were blind to the real one. You were so busy trying to get rid of the one honest person in this family that you couldn't see the rot that was right under your nose." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that everyone in the silent room could hear. "You tried to buy my wife out of my life, but she's the one saving us from Daniel's fraud. You don't deserve her loyalty, but I do." The words hung in the air, absolute and final. It was a complete rejection of everything his mother stood for. He wasn't just defending me, he was fundamentally choosing a new side. My side. He was choosing integrity over image, truth over loyalty to a corrupt system. I watched, holding my breath. For years, I had dreamed of this moment. For years, I had begged him in my heart to stand up, to fight for me, to show me that I was more important than his mother's approval. And for years, he had failed. But now, in the wreckage of his family's honor, he was finally the man I had once believed him to be. He wasn't hedging. He wasn't making excuses. For the first time, I saw Ethan choose me openly, without hesitation. He had finally found his backbone, even if it meant shattering his family to do it. The night of the dinner was the end of the Mitchell family as they knew it. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and brutal. Robert, with his cold, business-like efficiency, took control. Daniel was immediately suspended from the company, and forensic accountants were brought in. The carefully curated image of Mitchell Development began to crack, and rumors of financial trouble and internal corruption started to circulate through Austin's elite circles. The family business faced investigations, their reputation tarnished overnight. About a week later, I received a call. It was Margaret. Her voice was almost unrecognizable. The sharp, commanding tone was gone, replaced by a thin, desperate tremble. "Sarah," she started, her voice cracking, "please, I'm begging you, don't go to the authorities. The lawyers are handling Daniel. But if this becomes public, it will destroy us. It will destroy everything we've built." I listened silently as the once powerful matriarch, the woman who had tried to buy my dignity with a check, pleaded for my mercy. She talked about the family name, about the legacy, about the public shame. It was poetic justice in its purest form. She was begging me to protect the very legacy she had so coldly told me I could never be a part of. A younger version of myself might have savored this moment, might have felt the dark satisfaction of revenge. But I wasn't that person anymore. Holding on to this fight would mean staying tethered to them, to their toxicity, forever. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. "That's not my decision to make, Margaret," I said, my voice calm and even. And then I hung up. That evening, I sat down with Ethan. The past week had been a crucible for him, forcing him to confront the ugly truth of his family. He had been quiet, somber, but resolute. I took the small, encrypted flash drive where I had stored all the evidence, every email, every invoice, every fraudulent report, and placed it on the table between us. "I'm done," I told him, pushing the drive toward him. "I choose peace, not revenge. I give this to you. It's your family, your business. You decide what justice looks like." By giving him the evidence, I was giving him my trust. I was letting go of the anger and the need for control and placing my faith in the new man he was becoming. He looked at the flash drive, then at me, his eyes filled with a heavy understanding. He was accepting the responsibility not just for the evidence, but for cleaning up the mess his family had created. It was his burden to carry now, not mine. We never went back to that house. We packed up our things and left the life that had been dictated by the Mitchells. We sold the large and personal house that had never felt like a home and bought a smaller one in a quiet neighborhood, one that we filled with our own choices, our own laughter. Together, they stepped away from the toxic family, building their own life without the weight of Margaret's approval. Ethan worked with his father to restructure the company and deal with the legal fallout of Daniel's actions. It was a long and difficult process, but for the first time, he was doing it on his own terms. Our life became smaller, quieter, and infinitely richer. The weight of their judgment was gone, replaced by a lightness I hadn't realized was possible. We weren't the Mitchells, the powerful society family, anymore. We were just Sarah and Ethan. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. Have you ever been underestimated only to turn the tables with quiet strength? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of betrayal, survival, and poetic justice, because sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon.